Now is Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer. She's a member of the Senate Armed Services and Appropriations Committee. She's also the ranking member of the Senate Rules Committee. Senator, your reaction to what we're seeing at the border?
Well, obviously, my party, all Republicans, are very, very worried that we don't have a secure border, and we don't see any help coming from our Democrat colleagues. We see absolutely no action being taken by President Biden. In fact, he has said publicly that he plans on taking no executive order action in order to control and secure our border.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, the Venezuelan gangs that we've been talking about are quite concerning. There are gang members in New York right now that the NYPD told us about. And a new report warns of a second wave of possible Venezuelan criminals crossing into America through the southern border. The country reportedly just released at least 100 inmates from Venezuelan prisons. Last year, there were more than 335,000 Venezuelan migrant encounters, less than 1,000 deportations. Can you explain this, why we've got 335,000 people from Venezuela coming to this country and we've only deported 834? And now we know that the Venezuelan authorities are letting out their prisoners. And we're expecting those prisoners to come here. Two alleged members of this Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, are suspects in the brutal attack on two New York City police officers back in January, Senator. How serious is this threat from Venezuelan gangs?
Well, it's very serious. All of us know about the murder of Laken Riley, and the reaction by the president to it was really disgusting. We saw President Trump meet with the family, embrace the family. We saw President Biden barely mention it in his State of the Union speech and has had no outreach to the family. The alleged murderer is from Venezuela. As you said, Maria, we're seeing Maduro now has turned back planes that are trying to return Venezuelans to their own country as we turn them back. But we turn so very few back. Out of that 330,000, only 834 have been returned or turned back. So we're seeing now these prison gangs come into the United States. The Custom Border Protection has identified the tattoos that they have to try to help their agents identify them, identify more of them, because we know they're being sent to our country. But we're getting no help from this administration. We have had no help from this administration in securing our own border and protecting American citizens since Joe Biden took office.
Well, I mean, we're hearing it loud and clear from police across the country about these gangs, and there's no reaction whatsoever at the White House. I don't understand this. We spoke with Paul Morrow from the NYPD last week on this program. Listen to what he said about this specific Venezuelan gang in New York right now. Watch.
Tren de Aragua. Well, first of all, they're identifiable by their tattoos, but they twig to the fact that Border Patrol is looking at the tattoos. So now what's going on is they're telling them, don't get your gang tat until you get into the country, because they want to get them past the border. But they're a really powerful gang, and they punch above their weight down in South America. They actually have expanded beyond Venezuela because they run a lot of the migrant routes going into Ecuador and up through Panama and up through our southern border. They're organized, which is a great force multiplier.
It's pretty incredible to me that the national security issues that we talk about every day are not focused. It's just not a priority for this administration. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, definitely. You know, a core responsibility, a core duty of a federal government is national security. Well, we aren't seeing that happen with regards to our own border. Another core duty of a government is public safety. And when we know, and when we're being told by government officials, the Custom Border Protection, that these prison gangs are coming into the United States, they're trying to get their agents help in identifying them, but the agents aren't receiving help from this administration. So we have a public safety issue here on many different fronts. National security with no border security, and gangs now, more and more gangs coming into this country and murdering, harming American citizens.
I'll tell you, based on what I've heard from various lawmakers, I think that human trafficking is soaring in this country. I mean, human trafficking is another import, quote unquote, that we're getting from the wide open border, isn't it?
Oh, yes. You know, I've been to the border, and what we're told when we visit the border is that different organized crime syndicates in Mexico control certain parts of the border. And they see, of course, how they can make the most money. Can they make it by getting illegal immigration, illegal immigrants coming across? Can they get the most money through fentanyl, or can they get it by human trafficking? And they make their decisions based on how much money they can make. We are seeing more and more and more human trafficking.
Well, I keep mentioning this, Joe, because Roger Marshall, the senator from Kansas, told me recently that they've got more massage parlors in Kansas than they do Starbucks, because they're basically setting up massage parlors. The CCP is behind it, working with the drug cartels as a front for human trafficking in America.
Well, look, I think in the boom and the bust, what do we always see? We see this increase in the sex trades, right? And so even if you look at the OnlyFans economy as a proxy for what you know is happening in those black markets. So, Senator, my question for you is, understanding what Maria's talking about, the fact that there is sex trafficking happening, the rape trees on the southern border, the rape tents and the Darien Gap, when you hear that the president and this administration has been shipping over 300,000 migrants to cities all across this country, or to over 42 different cities, without the local governments even necessarily knowing who is covering. How is it possible for law enforcement to curtail this tragedy happening in plain sight?
It's difficult. I've said for many years now under the Biden administration that every state is a border state.
Right.
Nebraska, we see sex trafficking across our state. We have in the past in various activities that are held in Nebraska. You see an increase in that. Our law enforcement in Nebraska addresses that. But when you have such an increase, it is very, very difficult to be able to not just identify it, but then to attack it and take care of these victims.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the other threat we're talking about, also from the CCP, and that is the surveillance/propaganda issue around TikTok. The House overwhelmingly passed the bill that could end up banning TikTok in the U.S. if Chinese parent company ByteDance refuses to sell it. The bill now heads to the Senate. TikTok CEO and other officials reportedly on a lobbying blitz on Capitol Hill, urging users to make their voices heard and continue this fight. Senator, what happens to the TikTok bill when it comes to the Senate?
Well, I support the House bill as I see it now. I think when it comes to the Senate, there may be some efforts to amend it, address some concerns that members have. But let's be honest about it. We are, once again, talking about national security. We need to be aware of what TikTok is in this country and how the Chinese are targeting a whole generation of Americans. They're gathering a tremendous amount of information. I like to say they're vacuuming it up. They'll be able to use that in the future by knowing people's preferences, what they pause to look at on TikTok, what grabs their attention, how they would be able to influence these kids as adults in the future on how they act, what they think, how they vote, and influence that. When we look at targeting TikTok, let's remember we're not talking about banning and targeting TikTok. We're talking about targeting a foreign adversary owning a company that has such influence here in the United States. In the Cold War, we never would have let the Soviet Union have any kind of power that the Chinese government has now.
It's extraordinary, and it's a great analogy. Senator, real quick before you go, we're facing another funding deadline coming up, March 22nd. Do you expect a government shutdown, or are you going to continue these continuing resolutions?
What I'm looking at is addressing the funding. Last week, we were able to pass 6 bills that came from the House, 6 appropriation bills that went through the Senate Appropriations Committee, had public hearings, had an open process. I hope the House can send us some good bills now, and we don't look at shutting the government down.
All right, Senator, we'll be watching. Thanks very much for being here this morning.
Thanks.
Deb Fischer is